It's good to be back. This feels very normal. This is such a fine pulpit. I need to mention that I've had some throat and voice issues, and if you have a sense of humor, it's very helpful because I find it difficult to talk and breathe at the same time. But the water helps. And what I'll do with this final reading, or the second reading, is I'll save it for last. And Bruce is going to warn me when I've extended a graceful, gone beyond a graceful time limit, because this could go on forever, as you'll sense. This crisis with Israel and Gaza is absolutely terrible. I think we all know that, and it's become an issue in our presidential election. And if you talk to people throughout our country, opinions are different, but think about the American Jewish community where opinions are very, very diverse. Some of you may know of Temple Beth Adam, a Reform Jewish synagogue in Cincinnati. Robert Barr is the rabbi there. And he says that opinions within his congregation are all over the map. Probably as many opinions as he has members of his congregation. But he said that those opinions divide basically into four groups about, what should happen in Israel. And he said those four divisions reflect what's going on in Israel itself. The first division is the single state solution. This is the extreme right position. A single state solution, continue the expansions of settlements into the West Bank, and basically get rid of the Palestinians in Gaza, the West Bank, and throughout. Another single state position coming closer to the center is not quite so harsh with respect to the Palestinians, says no more settlements. Then when you go to the two-state solution, there are those toward the center who favor a two-state solution with increased benefits for Palestinians, obviously. And then the final position, which would be on the left side, a double state solution with no more settlements on the West Bank. And not only that, but to tear down the settlements on the West Bank that are already there, that have been established since 1973, and give that land back to the Palestinians. Okay. I'm not going to offer a solution. It's very, very complex, as I think we all know. But among all those positions, there is one common thread, and that thread is the land of Israel. And so you got a sense of this theological concept of the land in that reading from Deuteronomy. That reading from Deuteronomy is one of the very first organized statements of faith within Hebrew theology. And the sense is that their ancestor Abraham went into Egypt, but then when he left Egypt, they miss a little step here. A lot of time passed between Abraham leaving Egypt, the Hebrews getting back into Egypt by way of captivity, and then Moses leading them back to that land. So Do a history check. 3,300 years ago, as close as we can get it, is when Moses freed those Hebrew captives from bondage. And bit by bit, some of the biblical narratives said they came back all at once, but it really didn't happen quite like that. They came back bit by bit, settled in that promised land, the land of Canaan. And over the next nearly 3 centuries, they established these conclaves, geographical conclaves, that in our reference, we look at them as the tribes, the so-called 12 tribes of Israel. And these 12 tribes, Israel wasn't a nation yet, though. That land was populated by the members of these various tribes. And the tribes are named after the great patriarchs, Jacob and so on. But those tribes, sometimes they were aligned in little groups against other little groups of the tribes. Sometimes they stole from each other. It was not a happy relationship. And to make things worse, the Philistines had, at that time, one of the largest armies in the Near East. And this juggernaut army of the Philistines, one by one, was knocking off these tribes. And the tribes realized that in order to survive, they had to do something, but they didn't know what to do. And then this shepherd boy, David, not a bad name, actually, this shepherd boy shows some great skill as a military leader. And not just a military leader, he was very, very good, and that's going to continue to happen. But his real genius was how you take those tribes, get them to set aside their differences, and put them together. And when he pulled that off, they were able to withstand the Philistines. And so now we're looking back about 3,000 years ago. And what David does is he picks a neutral city, Jerusalem. It didn't belong to any of the tribes. And he said, this will be our capital city, and everything will emanate from here. And that's how the nation of Israel was born in that land that had been occupied by those tribes now unified into a real nation with its own land. And what David does then, and his generals, they go on conquests throughout that region and expand the territory. And lo and behold, David is survived by his son Solomon, who continues those wars of conquest and continues to grow the land of Israel. And so there's roughly a 100-year period under the reign of David and Solomon where Israel as a nation was a nation like the other great nations in that region, Egypt to the south, Assyria to the north. And of course, Solomon then builds a great temple. But when Solomon dies, it happened with Alexander the Great. It happens with so many of the great leaders of the world. When Solomon dies, his son Rehoboam assumes the whole kingdom, or at least he thought he did. But one of Solomon's generals, Jeroboam, decided otherwise and split the kingdom. So this nation of Israel under David and Solomon, which had been fairly significant, once it becomes split into northern Israel and then southern Israel, which included Judah and Jerusalem, once it becomes split, they're back in a similar situation with the tribes. Now they're vulnerable. And lo and behold, 2,700 years ago, this Assyrian general named, now get this name, Tiglath-Pileser III. He comes storming down, and he's almost in the process of defeating the northern kingdom, and he dies. But without missing a beat, he's succeeded by another great name, Sennacherib. Sennacherib comes in and finishes the job. And now there's no more northern kingdom. Half the land of the nation of Israel is gone. And those people, they're either killed, assimilated, and there's not even a whisper of a memory of the northern kingdom or that part of the land of the nation of Israel. Mike knows if I run out of voice, he'll come in and he'll finish this. He'll get to do the good part if I stop right now. Okay, so we go to the southern kingdom. It exists another 150 years. But another great nation, further to the north of the Assyrians, namely the Babylonians, they come down, they conquer the Assyrians, and thus they get all the land that used to be northern Israel, but they continue further south. And in 3 successive onslaughts, the Babylonians conquer the southern kingdom under their general Nebuchadnezzar. Now you got these names, right? We'll have a test later in the coffee hour, see if you remember them. So what happens? A little bit different for the southern kingdom than what happened with the defeat of the northern kingdom. The survivors of the southern kingdom are taken into exile into Babylon. And there they live in exile apart from their own land for several decades. But the Babylonians themselves get conquered by an even greater nation, the Persians. And the Persians conquer the Babylonians. This is an easy name to remember. Their general was Cyrus. Cyrus was not only a great military leader, he knew that if he continued to have the southern nations captive, that he could have disaffected people in his midst. So he says, I'll let them go. And if they want to go, if they want to return to their own land, I'll even pay their way. And even more, I'll pay for the rebuilding of their temple. Such a deal. And so, scores of those captives in Babylonia leave, and they return. But here's the hitch. They returned to their land, but it was no longer their land. It still belonged to the Persians. And what the Persians did, they said, you have to pay us tribute money, or we'll come and take you away again. So the way to look at it is these people now become renters in their own land. And that left a very bad taste in their mouths. Well, wait, this is our land. It was promised to us. We have these statements of faith. A land flowing with milk and honey. Well, maybe not milk and honey, but at least it worked for us. That's our land. And now you tell us we have to rent our own land? Well, yeah, if you want to live there, you have to. Well, once again, the wheel of history rolls, and Alexander the Great comes in and he conquers the Persians. And he says the same thing. He says, look, if you want to stay in your land, fine with me, but you still have to rent it. And what Alexander did is he just upped the fee for the rent. And this story continues. When Alexander dies, he's succeeded by his generals. And one of his generals gets control of Egypt. And so now you've got Greek Egyptians who control the land of Judah and even old northern Israel. And that goes on for about 200 years, and they still have to rent their land. And then the Syrian Greeks, where the wandering Aramean was from in the first place, they conquer the Egyptian Greeks. And the Syrian Greeks say, yeah, you can stay here, but you're still renters in your own land. And not only that, you have to become Greeks like us. You have to send your kids to Greek schools, gymnasiums. You can no longer worship in your temple. In fact, we're going to put the image of Zeus in your temple. Well, you may recall hearing about the Maccabean revolt. And it's that Maccabean revolt. Judas Maccabeus, his brothers, they conquered the Greek Syrians. And for the first time in hundreds of years, under the Maccabeans and their successors, for the next 100 years, Israel had its land back. And you read the literature of the times, the literature that was written between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and this was an occasion for great joy, and on and on and on. And it lasted for 100 years. The size of the nation then was about the same size as under David and Solomon. But then came the Romans. Under Pompey, the famous Roman general, in 67 BCE, he conquered the land of Israel for almost the last time. And the Roman overlordship was the worst of all. The Romans charged even greater rent. Finally, after 100 years, thank you, Bruce, this is only going to take another half hour. For a 4-year period, in Jerusalem in particular, the Jewish armies almost beat the Romans, but they didn't. The Roman general Titus gave them an opportunity to surrender, but they were so confident they would win, they didn't surrender. And Titus defeated them, destroyed the temple, and that was the end of the land of Israel. It is this, and think about what we know about our history of roughly not quite 300 years. So let us put ourselves in the position of Jews who have a history going back 3,500 years relative to their land. And then I'll just mention this in passing. After World War I and World War II, Jews began drifting back to the nation of Israel, but it was never the same. But you can see with this history, this huge history, where the land played such an important part, and it goes up and down and up and down and then back again. We can understand this sense of the land. But what's so difficult to understand is all the violence that has been predicated on that land, a relatively small piece of land, for more than 3 millennia. And it's so unfortunate throughout the course of history. I mean, if we just stay within modern history, it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. But I can remember this, like what Mike says, there are passages in the Bible that just overflow with passion and wisdom and goodness. And the one passage has a vision for Israel. It's a vision that is yet unfulfilled. But nevertheless, it's such a hopeful vision for Israel. And it is a theological vision. And it is not an exclusive vision. It is one of the most inclusive visions in the entire Bible. And it's with that vision that I will conclude. Now the Lord said to Abram, that wandering Aramean, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make you a great nation. And I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. But at the same time, by you, all the families of the earth, all the families of the earth shall be blessed."